Hello everyone, welcome back. I got some really good ones for you tonight, but first, I hope you've been having an awesome week so far. Let's dive right in. Markets. 3 major US stock indices all moved up modestly today, nothing crazy. Stock markets, real estate, Bitcoin really liked the 10-year yield in the bond market at 2.5% a month ago, really hated the 10-year yield at 3.5% a couple months ago. We're sitting right there in the middle at 3%. Market's kind of stabilizing here, not really sure which way to go, so they're looking for cues on whether to go up or down. We're kind of stable right here, so not really at a major support or resistance. I think we're just kind of banging around waiting for the Fed symposium to get underway and then get cues from Powell on interest rate policy going forward. At the Jackson Hole Symposium this time last year, Powell called the inflation transitory, really blew the Jackson Hole Symposium out his bunghole. I think he wants to lay low at this meeting this year. He doesn't want to come in too hawkish because all the players at the table low-key know we're in a recession, but he doesn't want to come in too dovish because low-key he knows all the players at the table know inflation's already become too big of an issue. So Fed's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they ease from here, they'll destroy the currency further. If they tighten from here, they'll burst the equity bubbles. I think they want to chill and just kind of lay low. They've already front-loaded some of their more quote-unquote aggressive rate hikes over the summer, 75 basis point hikes. I think we're going to keep going with the rate hikes, but they're going to be little baby bumps that are going to do nothing to stop inflation. Inflation that the Fed should have been getting ready to address and raising interest rates over in 2015. People are saying, oh, the Fed should have started raising interest rates like last year to stop this inflation. What are you talking? How about try 7 years ago? Try 7 years ago when the Fed funds rate was still zero following 2008. We were supposed to be getting back up to 7.5% on the Fed funds rate before the next recession, but we went into the 2020 crisis at a 1% Fed funds rate, 1.25%, and just slashed to zero. Policymakers, players at the table, they know cutting the Fed funds rate from 1% down to zero did nothing to adequately stimulate, so we got stuck at zero and printing trillions of dollars. Stoked a ton of inflation. Kind of like the student loan forgiveness, all these bailouts, PPP, forgiving student loans, it just weakens the dollar and stokes inflation. If you're worried about your taxes going up to pay for the student loans that just got forgiven, I mean, sure, that's definitely a possibility given we just hired another 87,000 IRS agents that are getting, well, not we, the government that's trying to get better at shooting you. They're like armed 87,000, some crazy stuff, but it makes sense. It makes sense because MMT, the type of economics that we're going into, whether we want to admit it publicly or not, states that you do massive government spending, send the money where it needs to go, and then rein in that inflation with taxation. But honestly, I don't even think the Fed needs to, or the IRS needs to levy higher taxes, collect more taxes to pay for these things. I don't, because the situation's worse than that. What makes you think the government needs to collect your tax revenue to balance their budget that they're never going to balance? The way it works is whenever the federal government, Biden, Congress, the government wants to spend a ton of fake money that isn't there, maybe forgive some student loans to paper over those creditors' losses, maybe send, a few $1 billion to Ukraine or a few $1 billion to Taiwan. Whenever they do that, it's not like they go to an account full of cash and draw from it. They go to the Fed, they knock on the door, they give the Fed a ton of T-bonds and, bonds and toxic assets, and the Fed gives them cash. And the Fed just, inflates their balance sheet. But these tenets of MMT, which are pushing this style of economics, they know that it's just making the Fed balance sheet larger and the Fed more powerful, and the government balance sheet larger and the government more powerful. There isn't a free lunch, though, because it just devalues the currency. Dollar is strong right now relative to other currencies. So if you look at like the Dixie or, any dollar index, you'll be like, I don't know, it's looking pretty strong to me. It's at multi-year highs. Yeah, that's because every other currency is experiencing worse inflation. But in the vacuum of space, in absolute terms, the dollar continues to crater. Things like student loan forgiveness, things like PPP, things like stimmies, things like war in Ukraine, things like war in, potentially in the South China Sea. Hey, these things really weaken the dollar and make the Fed's balance sheet larger, which makes the Fed more powerful. And you see, it's just kind of like a self-licking ice cream cone of a positive feedback loop of control, where like now the Fed has to and the government has to micromanage more and more the goings on of the economy. Call it fascism, call it social, maybe somebody called things that happened during the virus fascism. Maybe people are going to call some of the things going on around student loan forgiveness socialism. It's just different forms of collectivism, different forms of inflation and weakening the currency. But this ultimately sends asset prices higher. This whole notion that student loan forgiveness is going to bankrupt the government and cause the stock market to crash, polar opposite, totally, in my opinion, not how that works. To me, it looks something like the federal government wants to have more power, wants to increase its spending. Let's call it $5 trillion a year. Government goes over to the Fed, says, I need $5 trillion a year to fund all this stuff. Government gives a bunch of bonds to the Fed. Fed's indifferent on whether or not they ever even sell these bonds again. Fed gives the Treasury a ton of cash. Treasury goes out, blows it, goes deeper into debt. I mean, sure, you're going to want the Treasury to levy taxes, have the IRS enforce that, and use some of this tax revenue to pay for these things. But like I said, I think we're past that. I'm not going to say anything else on taxes, but just know that all of these policies are weakening the currency. I mean, Target's profits for Q2, we just got these numbers like last week, they fell 90% year over year. New home sales softening, manufacturing PMI softening, service sector PMI in contraction. Yet, we're not really seeing a lot of deflation, right? 3 major stock indices are hanging out semi-close to all-time highs. Median home prices in the U.S. are like $400,000. So when you have a printing press, then you're engaging in dishonest defaults, meaning instead of austerity, tightening your belt, paying your bills, you're just writing bad checks, cutting bad checks, printing fake money. Deflation's the least of your worries. So I believe that. And it's kind of showing in asset prices, the markets, what you're paying at the grocery store, in the pump. I mean, that's the real destruction of the middle class right there, disproportionately hitting the lower income people so that they have less disposable income. All their money's going into their gas tank, all their money's going into food and keeping their house cool or hot. That leaves them very little income to invest. And their wages just aren't keeping up. 13 years of really flat wages. And then if you want to roll the clock back even further, wages have fallen 5x against asset prices since the 1970s, since we defaulted on the gold standard. In like 1968, you could have worked a 35-hour work week and gotten an ounce of gold because gold was pegged to $35 an ounce. Today, that 1 ounce of gold is $2,000. So minimum wage in 1968 would have got you an ounce of gold a week. That would mean minimum wage today would need to be paying in the U.S. $2,000 a week if you were to peg it to gold. Wages have just collapsed. Real wages are collapsing, killing the middle class. Inflation hitting the CPI, killing the middle class. Stock prices getting way too high for people to afford, killing the middle class. Stymieing social upward mobility, pricing people out of the housing market, pricing people out of the crypto market. And anytime the country's missing growth, and economically we're missing growth, they don't let that manifest itself in market crashes and mean reversions. They just hit the gas on the dollar devaluation. So in good times, we're just devaluing the dollar steadily, and in bad times, we're really devaluing the dollar. That's why you got to be careful with all the deflationists out there right now, because I know the economy is imploding, the real economy, and I know the financial system is frothy and inflated. But if you're one of those people that is really concerned about all this, then wouldn't it stand to reason these issues are going to become even more exacerbated as time goes on? I mean, it would be a massive boon for the middle class to have median home prices hit 200K and wages stay where they're at. So why would you expect to be so lucky? How about we double these home prices, keep your wage the same, and we do this for a few more credit cycles? I mean, that's kind of what it's looking like. MMT, we've crossed the Rubicon these last few years. We're doing modern monetary theory. We're abandoning the Keynesian economics. If you're an Austrian economist, you're having like a brain aneurysm and a conniption fit every time you see, these policy changes. And so it's just maddening and a little bit crazy for people that have maybe a little bit more of a sound money, rigid economic paradigm. I'm really feeling for these Austrian economists that believe that a good economy comes from savings and capital investment as opposed to stimulating aggregate demand with fake money. So we're rewriting the textbooks on how your money is gonna be valued. It's looking a lot worse by the day. PPP, student loan forgiveness, and then fiscal policy aside, because that's all kind of fiscal, what the government's doing, those government deficits, those government budgets, and that's between the government, so the Treasury Department, and the Federal Reserve, which is not the government. So the fiscal stuff, the fiscal froth, the fiscal malfeasance, the fiscal nominal paying of liabilities, that's all done between the Treasury and the Fed, but we also have the monetary side of things, right? The monetary policy. The Fed dragging its heels on raising interest rates and breaking the back of inflation. The Fed just kind of chilling like I think they're going to do for the next few days. So from a monetary policy standpoint, very inflationary. From a fiscal policy standpoint, very inflationary. Just destroying the dollar, and that is going to double those asset prices, not because those asset prices have such strong fundamentals and are doing so well, but because the currency is just getting cut in half. That's what you're dealing with. It sucks, but I could totally be wrong and kind of hope the system does deleverage, right? So for real, I have like 8 or 9 more credit cycles before I retire, so bring on the deflation. It wouldn't scare me, but I know that's not the issue. It's such a psyop that this inflation is going to destroy the housing market. This inflation is going to destroy the stock market. No, these things freaking love it, and they can't get enough of it. And every time, the student loan thing would be deflationary if the creditors, the people loaning the 18-year-old $200,000 for a basket weaving degree, if he had to hold the bag on that, like he's just not going to collect now, and he's going under because he has all these outstanding loans that none of his students are going to pay him back for, that would be very deflationary. All that money would disappear, that guy's firm would go under, unemployment would skyrocket, the dollar would catch a massive bid. But that's not what happened. The Treasury swoops in the back door, underwrites the creditor, kind of gets him off the hook, and then also frees up the debtor. And where did they get the cash to do this? Well, not in some piggy bank. They got it at the Federal Reserve, who, like Neil Kashkari said this time last year, around this time, we have unlimited money at the Federal Reserve. That's kind of what you got going on. So the free lunch is that the Fed gave the Treasury cash with money that didn't exist 5 minutes before, and you pay for that through inflation and devaluation of the currency. Kind of is what it is. A lot of MMT crap flying around out there. It's really going to beat up that dollar even more, keep inflation broad, sustained, entrenched, and I think asset prices are just going to go along for the ride. So onwards and upwards for inflation. We're going to be okay. It's all good. Stay positive. Make sure your wage is doing the cost of capital and keeping up. Peg it to gold, okay? The reason you peg it to gold, you can't peg it to cell phone prices because Nokia brick phones are nowhere close to the supercomputers that phones are today. Those are hedonic adjustments. You can't peg your wage to car prices because of all the butt warmers we've come out with in the last decade. Those are hedonic adjustments. But if you want to use something that you don't make hedonic adjustments for, well then peg your wage to gold, non-productive clumps of atom that that you can't automate, you can't make that process easier over the last 50 years. Population grows at about 1 to 2% a year. The gold supply inflates at about 1 to 2% a year. It stays very stable. No hedonic adjustments to be made because the gold hasn't changed. You know, clumps of atoms in a pirate chest dug up today are just fine. So gold is good, but you could try, you know, corn. I don't care. Peg it to oil. Peg it to Bitcoin. Peg your wage to something, real estate, that's going to keep its value in the face of these collapsing currencies globally. Because it's your wage staying flat and asset prices skyrocketing that's creating the two-tier society, which is by design, all engineered, and jamming up the middle class and the youngsters so much. It's the fact that they're getting priced out of these markets, priced out of the ability to acquire assets. Their wage just isn't going anywhere anymore. The groceries just are killing them. And, you know, if you got $100 million in the bank already, you're not really worried about paying an extra $20 at the gas pump. But if you're making $25 an hour and you're putting $100 of gas in your tank just to make ends meet, and your electric bill's doubling because we're just forgiving student loans willy-nilly and forgiving PPP loans and sending billions of dollars we don't have to Ukraine on a daily basis and just what have you, well, you know, that all just manifests itself in a much, much weaker and more pathological currency. So we're living it. We're going to be all right, though. That's all I got for now. Thanks for joining me this evening. Like, subscribe, whatever. Till next time.